want to get right back to Susan Vanderpool in just a minute, but first pay tribute to the businesses that stand with us here to open up and help us stay on the air. I think there's DB and Company Printing and Marketing. We're talking David Bass here, who actually sponsors our business segment so that other businesses can come on for free and tell their story to the world. Dave Bass, thank you so much. And Legal Shield, you've got insurance for everything else. You need legal insurance. And these are the people that can provide it for you, whether it's a tremendous event in your life or just a trivial event, but you need a lawyer. These people can provide the very best at the very least cost. I'm just going to give you their cell phone, 707-537-5881. Call them. You really need to know about this.
And we'd also like to say thank you to our friends at Kern Construction and Electric Incorporated. Robert Miller, longtime resident of Bakersfield, specializes in remodeling of homes and businesses. Robert would be delighted to take a call from you at 661-322-5554.
And Chris, is this the time for a beta weed? Do we want to put that up? Oh, into the next segment. All right. Okay. Susan, out of your experience of widowhood has come a book. Tell us about this book and what you intend for it to do for families across America.
Yeah. You know, when I hadn't ever anticipated on writing a book, you know, I went through school enjoying sports and friends and, you know, tetherball as a little kid. And I had, like I said, had not anticipated this. But after I'd written the protocol for fire departments to use, just highlighting the vulnerabilities that a widow goes through, it's difficult to ask for help. Who does she ask for help? A single man, a married man? Does a firefighter come to her home alone? Who keeps track of it? What are her needs? And as well, realizing that firefighters were grieving too, and their statistics are on a sharp rise for PTSD and suicide. And so I needed to give, in my heart, firefighters a way to express their grief so that they can heal and return to work in a more resilient way and face the next trauma. But also the body of Christ. Churches needed a protocol to use when they were coming alongside their widows. And just a quick statistic, out of the 13 million widowed people in the United States, over 11 million of those widowed are women. So this is a massive, staggering number. And I think as God called me to minister to widows and the people who also are caring for them, he started to show me that there weren't a lot of books out there that were anything other than devotionals or a how-to book or describing what normal grief looks like. And those books were helpful to me. But my heart was called to write a book of stories with resolve that didn't insist that a widow just get over it or return to normal. And I think for anyone listening, that is one of the myths about grief. We're not meant to just get over it. Grief should always move and bear fruit, but we don't just move on, because our grief is a treasure that God has given us. And one of my favorite verses from Isaiah, God says he'll give us the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places. And I know that experience and reality tells me nobody really goes and hides a treasure out in the open. It's found in the dark, secret places. And so our grief is a treasure to us. And so the intent of this book is to help a widow look into her grief when other people just want to look away. And then at the end of the book, there's a link to my website where she can actually view the Life After Breath protocol. And for families of the fallen, she can go, if she's a firefighter widow, to the Families of the Fallen website and find that protocol there and begin to champion this protocol herself and hand it over to her church or her husband's fire department. And instead of her laying crippled by the roadside and vulnerable, she now has a purpose and a future and a ministry. And that was the gift that God had given to me, and I absolutely had to pass it on.
Susan, I remember the story of the National Firefighters Convention. I think it was in Denver when they first learned of your protocols, and I believe you received a standing ovation. Tell us about that.
Yeah. You know, again, firefighters were just family. Even though I'm remarried now, they're still my family. It's just nearly a blood relationship. And so I learned what it was to be a widow, having to keep knocking on doors. Even though the International Association of Firefighters had accepted my protocol as part of their best practices, they were busy. And I was the one that God had called to champion it. So I kept pushing my way in there over at the memorial, their International Association of Firefighters Memorial in Colorado Springs. And I went twice and had the honor of speaking to the honor guard there. These are the guys who are there bearing the flags and taking care of the widows of their fallen comrades. So they're grieving as well. And the first time I was done sharing with them, I looked down, walked off the stage, and they were standing. A number of them were crying. And they thanked me afterwards and said, "No, thank you. We had no idea. We had no idea that you were going through these struggles and that all we needed was a plan." And I learned particularly with men, and you can confirm this, Dawn, I don't know, most men, they're good bullet points, not paragraphs. And they needed a plan, especially if they're walking into a chaotic situation. And firefighters in particular. My goodness, they have a protocol on how to make coffee. So they had a plan and also they needed a plan. This is important. They needed a way to express their grief that wasn't going to compromise all that was masculine about their profession. So they needed a how-to. They needed bullet points. They needed a schedule of when to call. They needed always to make sure that widow felt safe. They needed to make sure their wives felt comfortable, and that's why they're never to go to a widow's home alone. Everything is logged, and that's included in the protocol, both for fire departments and churches, and really any business or organization or faith-based entity, law enforcement or military can implement this protocol and just mold it a little bit to fit their needs. And that way they're making their widows feel safe, and the people who are grieving internally have a way to express their grief. But particularly for men, they don't want to be a shoulder to cry, and they want to do something. And that's what the protocols provide.
And folks, think about this out there. Before Susan wrote these protocols, they didn't exist. I mean, it was out of Susan's grief, out of her experience, out of her walk with the Lord, that this has become a national protocol for the way to deal with grieving families and with the families of the fallen and their widows. Susan, what great fruit has come out of the darkness for you? What great treasure has come out of the darkness for you and for so many?
I agree, and no one's more surprised than I am. Truly, God uses the least likely in the emptiest hands, and I've learned my desperate need for Him, and all the honor goes to Him. It's very humbling.
And your children, your sons and daughters, how have they responded to what you've done?
Well, they are, they're my biggest fans, and they, we homeschooled our kids, and so they were front row center witnesses to the 4 years of my husband's illness, and they watched him die, and that kind of agony. He watched them watch him die, and they knew how difficult that was for him. He watched me grieve. He heard me cry in the middle of the night. And yet our kids, because, they all have strong walks with the Lord, we had a very close family. They've understood that remembering their dad is a sacred, it's a sacred thing. And I've never asked them to just shove their grief away. Both my husband and I reminded them we worship God with every other part of our lives, and our grief is no different. And so I think that was instrumental in their healing and recovery from their grief. But honestly, it still shoves us off the track. It's 10 years later. The book, as God would have it, is going to be released. It's available for pre-order now, but it's released April 7th, which nobody planned it, but that's 10 years to the day that he died. And we didn't plan it. The publisher didn't plan it. Just God did. And so the kids see God's hand in every little moment. I write about them in the book, and they still remember and grieve.
Susan, I'm going to want you to stay on the phone for our next segment, because the timing of the publishing of this book, 50 Shades of Grey, is just also remarkable. How, if God is your business agent or your publicist, you've really got one. And Susan, I remember, I'll just tell our viewers, our families were very close.
Yes.
With Susan, we homeschooled our kids together. And when Bob had passed, I just dropped by one day to visit Susan. We were sitting out on the porch. Her sons and daughters were there, but we realized in that moment, she and me just sitting there, that was kind of awkward. That was kind of awkward, and it just, you've provided a way that all that awkwardness can go away. That we can be with one another, support one another, love one another, within very holy bounds.
Amen. Yeah, that's well said. Thank you, Don. Yeah, agreed.
Susan, thanks for being with us.
Thank you,
if I were there, I'd help you plow the snow, but I'd rather be here in the sunshine in Kern County. So for all of you struggling out there, thanks for being with us. Hang on with you if you can. I think you're really going to love this next segment. We're going to now hear from the author of 50 Shades of Grace. We'll be right back.